Hi, everybody. I am Vanessa from the All Kinds of Mind podcast, also the CEO and co-founder of Social Saver. And I am really happy to have a very special guest on our show today. His name is Rene Sanchez. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast,
It's my
Rene.
pleasure, Vanessa. Thank you for having me.
Super excited to have Rene on. He's got a wealth of knowledge on all of these different topics, from UDL to special education, to just his experiences as a superintendent. And I'm going to just read out his bio, tell you a little bit more about what you'll be learning about him today. So Rene Sanchez is in his fourth year as a superintendent in Vermont. He's originally from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and he graduated from colleges in Midwest and Texas and has primarily been an educator in Austin and Houston. In Vermont, he has brought a data-driven focus and a systems thinking process to the organization in an academic belonging and operations area. He successfully passed a 5-year strategic plan, a transgender, gender nonconforming student policy, implemented the district's equity policy and equity audit recommendations, and established and now serves on its special education parent advisory council. He also serves on the executive committee of Vermont's statewide special education advisory panel. At his high school in Texas, he led his school to implementing co-teaching and universal design for learning and creating an inclusive school designed to advance all the futures of all students. He has written chapters in 3 different collections describing the transformation of Chavez High School. Rene has been married to Jean, a native Vermonter, since 2005. They have 3 children and 3 dogs. And Rene, on his free time, loves to cycle, cook, read, fish, golf, and work in the garden and yard, which honestly, me too, on a lot of those. Well, great, Rene. I think we're going to dive right in, and I would love to just start learning about you. Can you tell me a little more about the roles you've had and how you've supported neurodivergent students?
Certainly. So I would say that it really dates back to my becoming a principal. So in my experience, I've been a high school principal or secondary principal for 12 years. Early on, I was still learning a lot about special education. The training that you receive largely has to do with inclusivity of students of poverty, students from different ethnicities. There's not a huge amount of information and training that you receive for special education at the master's degree level. So much of my knowledge comes as a result of practicing. So was also extremely fortunate that my wife has a strong background in special education and was a special ed director when we were in Austin. So we had many conversations about what it takes in order to be able to serve all students, not just special education students. So when I became a principal of a very large high school in Houston, Texas, Chavez High School, at our largest, we had almost 3,300 students. And so within that population, we had around 9 or 10% students who were receiving special education services. One of the things that I had learned after, of course, learning from my wife how she was handling it at her high school was that it was really important for students to have the opportunity to learn from teachers within a co-teach environment, not just having the special education services available for them, but rather having them be within a classroom where they have teachers who are not only certified in special education, but also certified in the content area. Because as the research shows, it's really important for students to get the content or get the skills the first time that it's taught. Otherwise, it's largely interventions after that. So when I arrived at my high school, we had virtually every core content subject being taught in a resource fashion. In Texas, that means that more than 50% of the students or all of the students are receiving special education services, and they are not part of the general ed classroom. Before the first, I think, 6 weeks, we were able to convert our tested subjects, our state tested subjects, into co-teaching, and we spent the rest of the year in that model. As we moved into the second year, even though the testing requirements lessened, in a conversation with my chief academic officer, was like, we really want to move to universal co-teach. And he's like, why wouldn't you do that? It's the best thing for students. So that next year, in our second year, we began offering co-taught classes across the spectrum for every grades within our high school. One of the things I really appreciate about Texas, although Texas does sometimes have a hard time um, with special education, is that they require special educators who are going to co-teach to have the content area in which they're going to co-teach, so that way, when you walk into a classroom, the students are receiving education from both the special educator and the general educator. So it's a really great combination.
Mhm.
The other thing that I was really fortunate to happen when I was a principal is that my high school won a grant, a 5-year grant from our local education service center, and it was transforming high school learning environments using universal design for learning. And so we were going to take this behemoth of a 3,000 person high school and begin the process of converting and implementing universal design for learning across the spectrum. And so I know we'll
Wow.
get more into that, but that still to me is kind of one of my favorite things that I've been able to do. As an assistant superintendent, I was assistant superintendent for human resources and for transportation. So when I did that in South Bend, Indiana, as I onboarded new teachers, I provided monthly professional development on universal design for learning. And then also as a transportation official, I made sure that we had fair and frequent transportation for our students who qualified for special education transportation across our district. And then now, as a superintendent, I've been really lucky to be able to serve on the executive council. I'm sorry, the executive council for the special education panel for the state, where advocates, parents, and other community members serve, so that way we act as a monitoring and an advice arm to the state government and to the governor about special education within the state. And then more recently, based on the workings of some of the advocates that are on the panel, we began a special education parent advisory council within the district where my children live. And so I'm very excited that is still, though it's still in the fledgling stages, both my wife and I serve on it. And I think it's going to be great.
That is so cool. Yeah, and we'll also get into this more, but one thing I've really admired about you as a superintendent especially is the fact that you engage with your community so much in multiple ways. And that just sounds like another way we all are serving on this board and panel.
Thank you.
Um, awesome. Yeah. So, going on to what you mentioned with universal design for learning, I know clearly that's super important in your district and in the districts you've served before. How did you realize that it was important? And can you tell us, a little more details about how you've implemented it?
Certainly. So I would say that when it came across our desk, yes, is this something that we want to apply for? I took it as it was a tool to help us improve our co-teaching model, because I think, at least back then, it's almost 10 years ago, that the belief that universal design for learning is largely for special education students. But really,
Mhm.
when it is truly being implemented, it's taking into account the variability of the neurodiversity of all the students within your classroom. And so once you understand that it's helping everybody get better, whether it's how they're learning it, how they're giving it back,
Mhm.
or how they're engaging in the learning itself, it is absolutely critical that you consider it when you're designing your classroom. The other piece that I felt like was really important is when you design universally, you actually end up saving time. Because if you are kind of
Yeah.
creating a one size fits all lesson plan, you still have to modify it for your special education students and all of the services they need, your 504 students, your multilingual students. So instead of just having one lesson plan that can serve everybody, you now have to write multiple lesson plans to account for everybody that is within your classroom. And so
Yep.
So going back to our first year, when we implemented it, the plan was to utilize kind of a pilot model where our co-teachers came together with administrators, and we did book studies, and we went and visited different districts around the country so that we could see what it looked like. So I wasn't able to go on any of the early trips, but I ended up going on the last trip, like in May or June or something like that. And for me, it was kind
Mhm.
of like the Matrix. It's like I didn't really know what it was until I actually saw it. And once I saw it, I can no longer unsee it, both when it's being implemented and when it's not being implemented. And so taking into account what the classroom itself looks like, what even the arrangement of the furniture, where the teacher's located, the different ways that the teacher can interact with the content and with the students, and just seeing how students are able to belong in the classroom and feel like they can use their voice rather than having to sit still and just receive information from the teacher. It helps them develop agency. It helps them feel like they belong. And all the while, they're just learning how they learn so that they can become expert learners.
Fantastic. Love the Matrix. I love the Matrix illusion too. You really got like UDL
Mhm.
filled.
I did. I did.
Oh man. Awesome. So uh pivoting a little more towards how our audience who, we might be some admins, some teachers, uh what kind of things did you do to get school admin and teachers to buy in? Because I know that's a huge barrier to a lot of folks that are just thinking about, UDL.
Uh, so early on, I was kind of a follower because, as a principal, I thought, oh, okay, I've got my assistant principals, my teachers, they handle it. And then I was going to the
Mhm.
meeting. Once I started going to the meetings regularly, like this is actually really interesting because I kind of began that journey where I could see that um, everything is interconnected. And so once you connect the learning and you connect the content and you connect the students, that is when everything comes together. And so the first step was we had two cohorts, 2 years where we had cohorts. So we were able to take our special educators and our teachers and our administrators. So over the course of the first couple of years, we had about 40 people trained. The size of our
Mhm.
faculty was nearly 200, 200 teachers and administrators, and then another 75 or so staff members. So
Well,
we read several books. We had trainers come in from both from Texas and from Baltimore to get us up to speed on this is what it looks like. This is how you plan for it, and these are the results that students should be expecting. So that was really, really challenging at first, but then by year 2, once I was able to understand it and then I could explain it to others and I attended every meeting, people could see that the principal and many of the administrators were completely bought in. And so,
mhm.
and that's kind of become my practice since. If I really want people to believe in something, then I need to be there in order for them to believe that
Right.
it's important. So at the same time, though, we had a lot of other things going on our campus. We were recreating how we were doing CTE pathways. We were bringing in international baccalaureate. We were setting up our multi-tiered systems of support by bringing in PBIS to help us with our behavior and lots of other things that were going on from the district level. So every time something gets added, it always seems like one more thing. And so what we did is that we took all of the things that we were doing, and thanks to a coordinator friend of ours out of Baltimore, um, we were able to distill all of the important things from those, I don't know, 20, 30 things that we had going on the campus down to just 6 things.
Yeah.
So things like making sure that we're utilizing
Wow.
data, make sure that we were incorporating rigor, making sure that we were planning ahead because the most important thing on a campus is students when they're receiving the content and the skills the first time. So if that was our goal, that
Mhm.
is what we emphasize to teachers. The first time that the students receive the lesson is the most important time. So we're going to say all of our lessons revolve around these 6 things. And we ended up calling it the Chavez Circle, so and we had, it was all around the school so that the teachers and students could understand the 6 things that we're really focusing on. So we aligned everything that we were doing with First Teach and UDL at the center. By our 4th year,
Well,
we took the Chavez Circle and then expanded it to create a Venn diagram that the intersections of universal design for learning, international baccalaureate, and positive behavior interventions and supports. So that way people could see, yes, these are these are our main things that we're doing. But at the same time, this is how they all align. They all come back and they say that we need to focus on learners, we need to have a framework, and we need to monitor it. And if we do those things, then we're going to be successful. So once people saw that we weren't trying to just flood the professional learning with everything all at once, we were taking the different components, putting them together, implementing them over time, monitoring them over time, and then coming back and celebrating by showing off the data how we transform the school.
that is so cool. Yeah, I am also a huge believer in, that pattern recognition and being able to sort of distill and prioritize things by showing how everything is
Mhm.
interconnected and actually like these are not all 30 to very different things. They actually have these core principles. And sometimes it takes a little more
Mhm.
work up front, but ultimately it allows you to just streamline and be way more efficient in like implementing these processes. So that's really cool. So it's sort of that it's emphasizing like it's most important the first time a student learns it, and it's also as an admin especially being present and being like the role model, the example of like being in the
Mhm.
room and like truly understanding how these frameworks work. Very cool. Right. So now we've talked about all these really cool
Mhm.
ways that you and your various teams have, got over all these different types of barriers or implemented these systems. But what do you think over all these years? What has been the biggest barrier to inclusion in your districts, and how have you dealt with it?
So I think um, there are probably 3 main ones, but the first one is tradition in the sense that this is the way we've always done it. And because this is the way we've
Oh yeah.
always done it, there's a mindset that comes along with it, similar to, and I think the quote is soft bigotry of low expectations. So
Mm.
if schools and teachers and principals and districts are not making sure that when they're engaging in their IEP, their individual education plan meetings, and planning for students to attempt the grade level standards, and instead are utilizing something short of that and not using that as the vision, that's going to be really difficult for the student to ever get to where they need to be. And that applies to both
Mm.
skills and to academics. So it's really important for teachers and leaders to come into their environment and get a gauge how our special education students, our 504, and all of our other students are treated when planning is taking place. Then after that, and I guess this goes back to the mindset is, do you have enough personnel to implement a co-teach model? If you don't,
Yeah.
then you have to, depending upon at what level you are, you need to look at your budget, see how your personnel are currently being used. And if it's something that's really important to you and to your community, then you need to start the kind of the long process of, well, we're not going to change everything immediately the next year, but we're going to take a good hack at the system so that way we have the people in the right place to take care of the students and as to where we want them to go. And then the last thing, of course, is certification. I brought that up earlier. Is I think in
Yeah.
places where it's the responsibility of special educators to provide the academic interventions, that's fantastic. I think that learning the academic skills is really important. But when it comes to content, it's really important for that general education teacher or a special education teacher who is trained in the content to provide that extra level of academic. And so not every state does that.
Mm,
And not every a special education teacher has that extra content knowledge, and not every general education content teacher understands how to provide the necessary services to special education student. So, and then kind of the last thing is we have to understand that any student on our campus, doesn't matter who you are, they are our students. They,
yeah.
if a student exits your class for some kind of intervention of any kind, that student is still yours. Not doesn't belong to
Hmm.
that other person who's walking out with that student. They are all ours, and it's important to recognize that. So when that student is in your care, uh, in person, or even if they're in the next room over, it's really important to recognize that we're planning for them and we want their outcomes to be the best possible outcomes that they can achieve.
Most definitely. And those phrases always hit me whenever we talk. Like you're the they're all our students, that is still your student, no matter where they are. And man, the first time you told me the phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations, so much clicked in my brain. I was like, wow, I can really name this now. Um, yeah, you little off topic, but your phrasing, your words are just always so spot on to like define things well. Um, awesome. So might be a short answer, but when you talk with other superintendents, are they facing these same barriers in their districts?
I would say yes. What I can explain, okay, so in Texas, when I was there,
Mhm.
Houston was under investigation by the state of Texas, and the state of Texas was under investigation by the United States Department of Education, for both, for special education. Here in Vermont, we do special education pretty well, but um, there is still achievement gaps or opportunity gaps between our students who are receiving special education services and the general education population. And so in
Mm,
Vermont, because we have such small school, um, there is an additional category because the accountability subset at the national level is, I think, 25 students. So Vermont schools don't
mm,
often have 25 students of a particular identity group, but in an entire school, they might, or an entire district, they might. So Vermont has created these identity groups known as historically privileged and historically marginalized. And so that is where much of the work has to be done, is recognizing that there is going to be a 20, 30, sometimes 40-point gap between the achievement of our students. And it's important for us
yeah.
to, um, again, okay, so how are we doing this? Are we going to take our budget and do the exact same thing over again? Um, then you're going to get the same results. And that's probably
Yep.
not a good idea. And so we have to look at our personnel, look at how we're spending our money, and make sure that we are attempting to provide some sort of change or some sort of innovation so that we're able to perform for our students even more.
Most definitely. All right. So some folks might be listening or watching this podcast, and they may be like, all right, this is great that Rene was able to do this. I'm real happy for him and his students and his staff. But let's say an administrator has some limited resources, whether that's, funding, approval, buy-in. What are three ways that they can advocate for better inclusion practices for neurodivergent students?
I think uh, as I was writing my notes for this, I just wrote review current practices with an inclusive lens. So you're not going to be
Mm.
able to do every practice, but I would say maybe start with look at your IEP process, the run up to it.
Mm.
How are students getting to the point where they are being identified that they might need additional services? Are we using actual data or are we using the narrative of teachers and parents? So if we're not using
Yeah.
a combination of the two, then we probably aren't being completely inclusive. Look at your behavior systems. Are there certain students who are being sent to the office, suspended, um, being told to do, being told to undertake some sort of discipline more often than others? What are the characteristics of those students? And what can we do as educators so that we engage rather than escalate? And are those practices revolving around inclusivity? Then the next thing I would say is
Mm.
look at your budget, because your budget really is your budget explains who you are as a school district and as a school. Are you allocating enough money and resources in order to be a school district that focuses on access, opportunity, and inclusion? If you're not, and if you really have your tracks well set, you have your practices really well embedded, and there hasn't been much change over the last few years, your budget is telling a story that you're resistant to change. So until you're able to look at your
Mhm.
budget and look at your resources and your allocations, and then your data starts changing to the direction that you really want it to, then you are starting to become the district or the school that you want to really be. The other thing that I think is critical and not too expensive is to find schools in your area, in your state, or if you've got a little bit extra money across the nation that you can go visit and see how they are implementing inclusive practices in their school. And it can be everything from involving parents into the everyday nature, or finding out how students are being served via push in versus pull out, and the resulting gains that these schools have made. And then finally, the other thing I would say is if you have some early adopters, I think it's really important to involve them in that budget creation, involve them in those visits so that they can come back to their classes or to their grade levels and begin a small pilot where you're not only
Yeah.
you take your benchmark data for where we are at the beginning of the school year, look at it at mid-year, look at it at the end of the year, and if the teachers are happy, if the kids are happy, and the data's there, where the discipline's down, the parent climate survey is up, and the grades are up, then that is something that you should seriously consider expanding to a larger pilot or going full or going a school wide.
Yeah. Makes absolute sense. I also learned as a startup founder, completely different
Mhm.
field, that when you uh budgets, financials, they can speak volumes over like any, report or pure prose that you're sending out. And people who know their stuff will be able to know what's
Mhm.
going on with that budget from a mile away. Very much understand that. Those are great tips. All right. So I have a couple other questions next. So this one's a little bit more whimsical, theoretical. So if you could wage if you could wave, I know you and I are both a fan of D&D, so we're gonna include a little bit of sorcery
Sure.
here. So if you could wave a magic wand or a staff to make every administrator take an action towards inclusion in their districts, what action would that be?
So, well, if the wand or staff, uh, or maybe even a cloak where they could actually appear as one of their students and follow their student and
Ooh,
actually serve as their student for a day, I think they would have a really good idea of how our students are, how they engage in the day. And so, and if they don't have any of those magic items, um, then I
mm,
would say that it's follow a kid, make it, take a day, take a half day and see how the student experiences the day. Are they, And I would also probably do it by not announcing it. Because if you announce it, then
Yeah,
people can make sure that there's things taking place. But if you do it unannounced, you follow the student, you have a pretty good idea of what's going on. Um, and then kind of if you are unable to do that, pull in some students and talk to them about how's it going? Are there things that we could do better? Are there things that we do really well? And if so, then make sure that you expand the things you do really well and try to understand why you're doing the things that the students don't like.
for sure. No, I think that is a great tip and a great thing to do with or without an invisibility cloak to work either
Right.
way. Um, Fabulous. So, last question. So as you very well know, Social Cipher creates online social emotional learning games for neurodivergent youth. And we bonded a lot about this when we first met. I mean, you came up to me after I did a pitch and you were like, what is I want to talk about the connection between autistic students and anime. And then we ended up having this huge conversation about this connection between neurodivergent young people and media, from anime to games to tabletop role playing games. And you also have neurodivergent children
Mhm.
yourself. So, how has your understanding of that connection of media and neurodivergence and your, your lived experience as a parent of neurodivergent kids, how has that all helped you when it comes to knowing what resonates with your students?
Well, thank you for that. So, that certainly was one of my favorite days when we were able to just a smile on your face when I started making those connections. You're like, this guy gets it. Um, and so, and I think, so I'll start off with how my oldest really recruited me to kind of following his love of anime. So the first thing that he made me sit down to watch was something called Assassination Classroom. And so if you have not seen it, yes, it's probably not a good idea. The title says a little bit about it, where the students have been told that they need to assassinate their teacher, but along the way they can't, because the teacher has figured out how to teach the students not only academically but emotionally, and they begin to do everything they can in order to protect the teacher and their classroom. And it was just extremely overwhelming for me to see that as a universal design for learning advocate, how they were able to incorporate that into anime. But I think even beyond that is that there are many characters within the media of whether it's anime or games, or even other animated series, that who look, act, and think differently from the characters who are within or external to the media. And often they are
Mm,
celebrated for what they're able to do in the media. With again, I definitely need to include games in that as well. Um,
yeah,
and so many students and others identify with these characters. So seeing themselves in the media or seeing something that they aspire to in the media can go a really long way for creating engagement and especially belonging. And so, if you're an educator and you hear students talking about their games, or they're talking about the manga that they're reading or the anime that they're watching or the role playing games that they're watching or they're playing, um, they love those things. And so it's absolutely
mhm,
critical for our students, particularly our neurodivergent youth who have a particular bond with characters, um, that they have the ability to replicate what they feel like they can do well in the classroom. And so when they are given the
yeah.
opportunities to succeed, utilizing how they have learned that they learn, they are going to do much better and they're going to feel much more safe within the classroom.
Oh, yep. You know, I'm a 100% believer in that. So thank you for just like voicing that so eloquently. And so, yeah, in just such an awesome way. Um, Fabulous. Well, those are all my questions for you today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Renee. This was awesome. And I'm sure folks have learned a whole lot. Lastly, just where can people find you?
So I think it's really easy to find me on my LinkedIn page. I think it's just Rene Sanchez, and or you can reach me at my school district, Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union. And please feel free to send me an email, and I'll be happy to respond. So thanks.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us on another episode of the All Kinds of Mind podcast, where we tell you real stories from real administrators and teachers that are making a huge difference in inclusion for their students. We really hope you join us next time. Bye.